I think we can all agree that 2020 is one of those years that we can't wait for it to be over. We're just ready to turn the calendar and hope 2021 has got to be at least a little bit better than this disaster area of a year. Once Kobe and his daughter died in that helicopter crash, along with the others, it just went all downhill from there, didn't it? And it did. So we look to sports as an avenue, a pathway, an escape from the doldrums and suck, frankly, of our everyday modern lives. So, of course, COVID being that great taker of everything that we enjoy, it significantly impacted sports in this country throughout 2020. NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, all of those seasons got delayed several months. Golf got delayed several months, like you name it. The Olympics got pushed back to 2021. Like all of these things that you were counting on during the course of the year to help you get through the year, COVID and the impacts and aftermath of COVID helped take all of that away. But as we're getting ready to come here towards the fall and getting into August, and now you start to really say, okay, these other sports are back, but admittedly, they're a little different. Like this country, first and foremost, is a football country now. Football is what we pine for. Football is what we live for. Football is king. So all those other things, it's whatever. But luckily, COVID didn't impact the 2019 season and ultimately that Super Bowl. And we're hoping by the time we get to August, you get to training camp and the preseason and everything else, that COVID wasn't going to be a concern or not be a significant factor, because at the end of the day, Americans need their football. And that is both pro football and college football. So, of course, now, because it is that type of year, we're talking about 2020. What else would we be talking about? Things just can't go as you might hope. You've had several conferences already announce that they're not playing fall football. The MAC did it first, and that was just kind of the opening of the floodgates, to where you got some of the Power 5 conferences, the Big Ten, the Pac-12, saying that they're not going to play fall football and they're going to pursue potentially playing football in the spring, which is an interesting thing in and of itself, because you can take a lot of things on this. And I hate when somebody says, oh, let's not get too political, or they try to shy away from that, because politics are life. Life is politics. It's just the reality. I just find it's a really interesting dynamic that those conferences that you might perceive as more liberal, or at least a little more liberal in the case of the MAC, or maybe the Big Ten, and certainly extremely more liberal in the case of the Pac-12, are being incredibly conservative in terms of their approach and their mindset to playing fall football in relation to COVID, and saying we don't want any of it. Where the more conservative-based conferences in terms of geography and mindset and so forth, such as the ACC, such as the Big 12, and most certainly, of course, can't leave out the SEC, at least as of this time, have not made any acknowledgments or decisions that they're going to push back fall football to the spring. Like, you got all these conflicting approaches going on here. These other conferences, at least for the moment, seem to be trying to pursue efforts to play some form of college football in the fall. So conservative conference areas are being very liberal with this handling, and liberal areas are being very conservative. It's just weird. It's just weird. And not surprising maybe, but just weird. But looking at this, it's like, okay, so now you've already had 2 of your Power 5 conferences back out of fall football. Although you have some schools, such as Ohio State and Michigan, Nebraska, and so forth, potentially pursuing, wanting to go into joining potentially the Big 12 to be able to play this year. And it's just all sucks. Well, let's just call it as it is. It just all sucks. And the fact that we even got to this point represents the effects of a total lack of failed leadership here. And while it is easy for a lot of folks to just blame the president, who certainly does deserve blame for the lack of acknowledgement of the threat at the very beginning, at the early stages, when something could have been done to minimize the impacts, the kind of distortion of reality and the attempting to minimize and shift blame and shift focus and everything else has impacted this country, continues to impact this country, and has cost people lives, let's not also forget the fact that you also had other liberal and democratic leaders that were very dismissive of this from the very beginning. Well, it's over there in China. It's never going to get here. And if it does, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And then once it did, all of a sudden they're trying to run to the rescue like this is a big thing, and they're pointing at him and blaming him and blaming him. They're equally culpable here. They really are. So if you come in the comments, and which inevitably will, because I brought it up, get what I sow, I guess. But if you're going to say, well, yeah, just no. Just shut up, all of you. Because everybody is to blame for this. The people that say they love college football and want it back so damn bad were the ones that got ants in their pants. I couldn't sit there and be bothered to wear masks. These are the consequences for your actions. Now, personally, I could also sit there and say very fairly, so for these conferences that decided they didn't want to play college football in the fall because of the risk, even though they know that's not it, that's a total load of crap. You're going to make the argument that it is safer to have even more people in terms of young adult males and females at your college campuses in even more closely confined quarters, and that's supposed to be okay. It's not okay for college football, but it's in other fall sports maybe. But it's okay for students to be living in dorms and doing all of these things. That just inherently, fundamentally makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And even if you look at it from the money aspect, sure, you're getting a lot of money from the kids having to pay for school and going to school, but how much money do you make from having fall football? I just don't get it. None of this makes any sense. Do you realize that college football, some of these conferences are trying to do it as a way to try and avoid the players organizing and potentially unionizing and getting the amateurism BS out of NCAA football, which is coming down the pike at some point in time. You can only fight against it but so long. Might as well embrace it because it needs to be embraced, because otherwise we're just perpetuating a cycle of hypocrisy and corruption, and that's flat out what the NCAA represents. But I look at it now and it's looking past all of that and the stupidity of this and the failed leadership across the board on that, the selfishness of people in pockets and segments of the country of saying, I'm going to go protest and not wear a mask. I'm going to go out to Costco and not wear a mask. I'm going to rage how this is a great violation of my civil liberties and my freedoms and blah, 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 blah. It's a-holes like you that have led to situations like this where this is mid-August, this is not under control, and now we've given air cover for folks to cancel fall football. This sucks. Shame on you all that contributed to in any shape or form, especially the media. That certainly drives the fear narrative here. Yes, having 3 to 4% of people that are infected die is not ideal. It's not good. And I do not ever want to sound like I am minimizing it. I just wish, when it comes to something like that we would pay as much attention to this as we do things such as cancer and heart disease and so forth. Those other things that consistently kill more folks year in and year out. But with all that said, what's next for college football? What comes up? You look at this. Let's say you try to proceed ahead, and you're the Big 12, you're the ACC, you're the SEC, and you say, we're going to plow ahead anyways. Are we really going to care that much about the season? Maybe geographically, if you're in one of those conference areas, maybe you will, but will the rest of the country? I don't know. Even when you talk about the thought of doing the playoffs and having a national champion, but you've only got 3 of the Power 5 conferences, it just feels like it's going to be setting us up for yet another big-time disappointment. It's just going to feel weird. It's not going to feel the same, just to me, like all these other sports have that have come back so far. It's just off. It's just different. It's just weird, and it just sucks. And don't get me wrong. Ideally, I would much rather see some form of a college football season in the fall than none at all if we could get there. But I just don't understand, how's the dynamic going to work if you have some teams playing in the fall and you have others playing in the spring? Could the XFL potentially come in here and swoop these kids from the programs that didn't do it, that didn't have fall football, and say, hey, we'll start you up and we'll play you and we'll pay you as you're getting ready to prepare yourself for the NFL? That's just weird. What are you going to have one national champion in the fall and another national champion in the spring? It's just all types of screwed up. It's all types of screwed up. And if it's about COVID, and it's about the inability to effectively administer testing and control the environment and do what is necessary in order to keep players, coaches, officials safe, then shame on the schools. But we know in and of itself that is not the only reason here. There's a lot more at play. It's the control factor. It's not wanting to give the players more control. It's all of those things that are leading to this. Well, what happens though? Like, are we going to have college football on Saturday, but it's teams playing in empty stadiums? Like, think about this. If you're in the SEC, the Iron Bowl, Auburn and Alabama, you have no fans. Or maybe you have 5,000 or 10,000 fans in the stadium. What a wet fart that's going to be, huh? A Red River rivalry, Texas and Oklahoma at AT&T Stadium with 3,000 people there. All trying to contend to get playoff position this way. This time, it can be justifiable for the SEC to actually have two schools in there. And this time, it's going to be, by God, default, actually justifiable that Oklahoma gets its spot that it seems to consistently get year in and year out. It's just going to be crap. And if you have other teams playing spring football, that's going to be crap. And then what happens for these guys that are thinking about the NFL or have NFL aspirations or are thinking about the next step of their career, next phase of their lives? Like, you look at these kids, what are you going to do with the NFL draft? Are you still going to try and have the NFL draft at the end of April, beginning of May? With a lot of these kids potentially not having played their last college football season? I can't imagine being scouts, front offices, general managers, owners, and being okay with that or thinking that's okay. It will make the draft inherently more risky because you're losing a whole subsection of tape and etc. that you could be using to grade, evaluate, and rate guys. You're not going to have, part of the purpose of having the whole kind of draft process is being able to mitigate risk, weigh risk versus reward of these prospects. It is going to be an inherently much more risky function to be able to sit there and have a draft, plow ahead like nothing's changed, nothing matters. Like, it just sucks. And you think about it for some of these guys. Like, I saw somebody put on Twitter the other day, and I think Joe Burrow even kind of alluded to it. Like, if there wasn't a 2019 college football season, he might have been a mid-round pick. Absolutely true. He had a 2019 college football season. He ended up going number one overall in the draft. Now, you look at Kyler Murray. If there wasn't a 2018 college season, he might be playing baseball. Instead, he ended up getting a 2018 college season, ends up going number one overall, Baker Mayfield. When you look at him, that you sit there and you say, okay, if there wasn't a 2017 college football season, he might not get drafted, or if he was, he's probably a day 3 pick. He gets to play in 2017, he gets to end up being a number one overall pick in 2018. Those are 3 straight years that the first pick in the draft, the first quarterback taken, which is one in the same year, the last 3 drafts, those number one picks were all quarterbacks who the year before hardly anybody was talking of being anywhere close to that type of territory in terms of where they might be drafted. So what the hell are you going to do with the draft now? What are guys like Trey Lance and so many others that play at smaller programs that aren't going to be able to play fall football? What the hell are they supposed to be able to do? I just don't know. Are you going to have to push the draft back? Are you going to have to sit there and cancel all of fall college football entirely and just put all of your eggs into the spring basket? I don't see how you can't at this point. I just don't know. And even for the kids that have no NFL dreams and no NFL aspirations, that are just going to school, now you got to sit there and you go to class, but you don't get to play football. Are they going to lose that eligibility if for some reason there is no fall football at that school, there is no spring football at that school? Are they going to be able to say, hey, I graduated, but I can keep that extra year of eligibility since I technically didn't get to play in the 2020 season? There's just a lot of things here that I just don't know what's going to happen. And it just feels like this is going to be even more of a dumpster fire and a train wreck in the weeks to come, where you have a bunch of people arguing about what's right, when the reality is, no, I don't know that anybody knows what's right. It sure feels like having half of your conferences play in the fall and the other half playing in the spring doesn't feel very good, doesn't feel right, but maybe that's what we got to adjust to, and maybe that's what we're going to have. Is a college football champion that has an asterisk next to their award. A spring football champion, same thing. An NFL draft that still happens in April, damn anything else, or an NFL draft that happens in freaking July, 2 weeks before training camps are scheduled. 2020 sucks. People suck. Just everything about it right now sucks. And the fact that we even got to a point that some conferences have canceled their fall college football absolutely sucks.